to all. We're getting ready to swear in our new commissioner. And I'd just like to present Michael Browning from Out of Hearts. He's got a good background working with youth and different jobs he's had and things, and his heart's in the right place. And I think that he just got in 4 months, so he's going to have to work extra hard to get it all done in 4 months. But we do welcome him, and I hope you all work with him and communicate with him, let him know any concerns you may have, because although he lives in one part of the county, but the commissioners represent the entire county. So our responsibility is border to border. Thank you.
Okay, if you would raise your right hand, repeat after me. I
Michael Brown,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of West Virginia,
and the Constitution of the State of West Virginia,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties as Commissioner
and I will faithfully discharge the duties of Commissioner
of the County of Lincoln
of the County of Lincoln
and the State of West Virginia
and the State of West Virginia
to the best of my skill
to the best of my skill
and judgment,
and judgment,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Earlier this morning, Rick McDowell came in the office to get some paper signed, and I said, Rick, have you met our new commissioner? He said, a long time ago. And, I thought he just doing me that way. Come find out, Michael was a 4-H'er way back there, and he's been 4-H camp and some of that thing. So Rick's got an inside track.
Always good to have.
Family photo.
Wait till he sits down.
Yes, sir.
We're very close to God.
You in trouble?
3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Maybe the closest we ever get.
Would everyone please stand to say the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This session of the Lincoln County Commission on August the 16th, 2012 at 10 a.m. is now called to order. Members present is Merle Hugh Clerk, Charles McCann President, Charles Vance Commissioner, Michael Browning Commissioner. First thing on the agenda, I need a motion to approve the minutes of the regular session of the Lincoln County Commission meeting that was held on August the 2nd, 2012 at 6 p.m.
So moved. I'll second that since Michael wasn't here at that time. Is it an all yes vote? Motion carries.
Next thing on the agenda is discussion and concern. We have Paul Miller. He is going to talk to us about mineral trust fund.
Welcome, Paul. You can approach up here or go over there to the podium, wherever you're comfortable with.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Paul Miller, and I am the Director of Policy Outreach for the Center on Budget and Policy. The Center on Budget and Policy, you may not be familiar with, it's located in Charleston. It's a think tank. It's a research think tank. We do tax and budget policy analysis. basically economists, the economic analysis, budget wonks, budget analysts, that kind of stuff. And so what we do is we look at budget policies or tax policies, particularly as it affects moderate and low-income families throughout West Virginia. And if issues are important, we want to bring those to its attention. And that's my job as the Director of Outreach, is to work with local and regional community economic development officials such as yourselves. My colleague and I have been traveling all across the state, meeting with county commissioners and local and regional economic development officials, presenting them this sort of outline of a policy that is taking place in Charleston that should be on your radar screen. The issue that we're talking about today is an issue that we think its time has come. It's an issue called the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. Some have called it the Future Fund. But the idea is very basic. The idea simply says the state expects to receive additional revenues, severance tax collection revenues from Marcellus Shale development. And instead of just simply putting it in the general revenue pot and allocating it out to the distributions out to the counties that we normally do, the thought process is let's take some of the additional money that we anticipate coming in and set a portion of that aside and for a period of time, and then let's use it and earmark it specifically for things that local and regional economic development officials need, like roads and bridges, water and sewage and broadband, all the things that are important to help make West Virginia a more attractive place to do business. So that's kind of the general premise, and yes, sir.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so what I have before you is just the real sort of as an outline of the presentation. I'm just going to summarize it and leave that with you for your information. The thing to think about as what we do is we sort of looked at the economic data, and we've looked at West Virginia's economy over the past 100 years, and we've realized that despite the fact that West Virginia's wealth, natural resources, particularly in coal in southern West Virginia, hasn't really benefited West Virginians. And that's sort of the irony that we see, is that arguably West Virginia should be the richest state in the nation, given our abundance of natural resources, coal, oil, gas, and timber. But yet the data shows, and this outline shows, that West Virginia ranks 49th and 50th in terms of health, well-being, and prosperity. So clearly we didn't really get the long-term benefits. The state did not get the long-term benefit from that. And so that's the kind of thing that we see. So how is it that we're so wealthy underground, but our people have not benefited from that? And so that's kind of what we see. And what we documented is that West Virginia, being tied to a natural resource economy, has its ups and has its downs. The ups, times are good when production's up, prices are up. You get increases in employment, increases in population, increases in per capita income, all the measures of health and well-being. But when the bottom falls out of the market, when production declines or price declines, you see the devastating economic impacts. You see people leaving, you see the lack of jobs, the low per capita income. And then in that document as well, you're going to see some serious needs that West Virginia is facing. Serious needs with its workforce, for example. West Virginia has the lowest labor force participation rate in the country. Okay, that means people between the ages of 16 and 64, there are fewer West Virginians actually involved in the labor force than any other state in the country. And again, in that analysis, you're going to see data that shows that West Virginia has one of the least educated workforces. We have some of the most significant needs in West Virginia. We have high per capita, percent poverty, disabilities, a number of things that we're looking at that are really not helping West Virginia move forward. So we got all these problems. We don't have any way to pay for them. And local and regional economic development officials like yourself are constantly faced with opportunities to develop a project. But again, similar to other counties, there's not enough money to go around to fund this project. Good ideas, but we just don't have the money. So the idea is today we're actually at a crossroads. in terms of with the developing of Marcellus Shale boom, it presents to West Virginia an opportunity, and basically a second bite at the apple. It says, okay, how can we capitalize on this new boom in mineral resource extraction and not repeat the mistakes that we did and our forefathers did in the past? So how do we capitalize on Marcellus development? And the idea is we take a finite resource, a mineral, that once it's extracted, it's gone. So you take the coal out of the ground, you get the economic benefit of pulling the coal out of the ground, you get the jobs. And you get the jobs of transporting it. But beyond that, once the coal is gone, the economic benefit to West Virginia is gone. So it has a very short-term, short-life economic benefit to West Virginia. And, you know, it's good, and we'd love to think that this was going to, that, you know, coal production is up, that we could survive on, you know, coal economy. But there are a number of factors that you're all aware well of that suggest that, you know, coal production is going to decline, or there are threats to coal production. And so really it means that at the end of the day, West Virginia's economy is tied to an industry whose future is very unstable and unreliable. And so how do you move forward? You know, moving forward as a county when you're collecting severance tax collections, thinking, okay, but 10 years, 20 years down the road, where are we going to be in terms of collecting severance tax collections? What does that mean for our county when we do not have those additional severance to rely upon to help fund your bills? So this is the reason why we kind of look at the big picture and we kind of say, okay, how do you take a finite resource, and this is the important one, how do you convert it into a permanent source of sustainable wealth for West Virginia, for our children and our grandchildren? And this is where the idea of the trust fund comes in. Now, this is not a new idea. Several states in the U.S. currently do that, particularly out west, mineral resource states like West Virginia. So these states have established a mineral trust fund. And as such, they're able to use those funds for economic development purposes. So many states, like Alaska, has $40 billion in their development trust fund. And in Alaska, you're probably familiar with, they actually give dividend checks to the citizens of Alaska. I mean, I think we've all heard about that. I mean, that may not necessarily be the best idea to use it, but the fact is they got $40 billion in their trust fund. And that represents about 10 years worth of general revenue spending in West Virginia. So they kind of give you a perspective of how big that trust fund is. Most states probably have trust funds in the range of $5 to $12 billion. But $5 to $12 billion would be a substantial amount of money that West Virginia would to have and set it aside to rely on for things that we need. Not to pay for emergencies like the rainy day fund when there's floods and disasters, but to think proactive. Okay, how do we develop? How do we create more areas that are attractive to business, or we can retain existing business? How do we make it more attractive for West Virginia? And we invest in infrastructure. We invest in workforce. We invest in our education. We become a highly competitive workforce. And so one of the proposals that was debated, and it was a bill introduced, it did not pass last session, but it gained momentum. It passed out of subcommittee. And we see it gaining momentum. We see it gaining traction. And that was a bill that was Senate Bill 182. It's in your PowerPoint. And in that bill, what they said that they were going to take 25% of the additional Marcellus shale gas revenues over and beyond what the state currently receives. They're going to take 1/4 of the incremental revenues and set it aside in a trust fund. And they would set it aside for a period of 20 years. And then after 20 years, they would start spending that interest income on economic development projects that local and regional economic development officials are looking for. So that's the basic premise of the trust fund, the idea. One thing to keep in mind, there's actually 2 points I want to make, and then I'll answer questions. One thing to keep in mind is that that bill doesn't change the tax rate on the severance tax rate. It just simply says, okay, currently we're getting about $65 million in gas collections. We're going to get more gas severances coming in. We know that because we see permits being issued, we see leases being arranged, we know there's activity. So we know money's coming in that's going to be more than what we had in the past. So they said, okay, we'll take 1/4 of whatever additional money comes in, we'll set that aside for 20 years. So it's not changing the tax rate. So I think that's the first point. And the second point, and this is kind of the larger point the reason why I'm sort of here, is that if you aren't familiar with this issue before I got here today, then I've already accomplished my mission, which is to introduce you to a policy that's being debated in Charleston that you may or may not be familiar with, but you should be involved in because it certainly is going to impact Lincoln County. What I'm suggesting is that you become familiar with the policy issue. You've got the handout, there's a website. We'd be glad to come back answer any questions that you may have. And to become involved in the policy discussion process with your delegates and your senators about this proposal. Now, I did mention that in the previous session, they introduced a bill, actually introduced 2 bills, it's both of them are in your as a companion bill, which they normally typically will run a companion bill. But they've also done something else. Commissioners, they've introduced this topic as a point of discussion during the legislative interim process, which means, generally, what that means is they're interested in it, they want to learn more about it. So during this off legislative session, this interim session, they're studying this topic. And so presumably what happens at the end of the session, at the end of one of the interim sessions, leading up to the full session, they'll work on crafting another bill to be introduced in the next legislative session. So I think this is the appropriate point for you to become familiar with the bill and to become involved in the policy discussion. Now, I know you're probably thinking, okay, that's nice, but what am I doing here? What's the goal here, right? I mean, I get this wherever I go because, first of all, part of my mission is accomplished if you've never heard of the West Virginia Single Budget Policy. I know it's hard to think, but we're the only kind in the state. We're funded by nonprofit organizations. We're funded by Kellogg Foundations, the Benetton Foundations. We've been funded by the Sisters of St. Joseph's, the Ford Foundations, and a number of foundations that look at policy or they look at how to improve the lives of citizens. And so that's kind of where we come from. And we're not going to be around when the discussions get made about where the money gets spent or how it gets invested. That's not our job. Our job is simply to raise the issue, put it on your agenda, to raise the consciousness of the people so they're familiar with this idea. And so that if they think it's a good idea, if you think that this is a valuable input to this process, then what we've asked the county commissioners across the state and local and regional economic development authorities and planning commissions, we've asked them to look at a broad worded resolution that says simply, we support this idea of setting some money aside and reinvesting it back in economic development for the future of West Virginia, for our children and our grandchildren. So I'll stop there. I know that's a lot, but I would appreciate if you have any questions. I'd be glad to answer that. And I would also, with your deference, I would ask to introduce my colleague. His name is Rick Wilson. And Rick, would you like to maybe say 2 words?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Rick Wilson. I live in Lower Milton, Northeast Hamlin. Most of us all right up the road here.
Outskirts.
I think Rick McDowell can vouch for me. I've spent my time down here. I think this is a really good idea. Basically, it's a way to turn something that's non-renewable into a permanent benefit. I think it's ironic. It just occurred to me about 100 years ago in Lincoln County, talking about a gas boom. Didn't something happen to a courthouse here? Does anybody remember?
Had something related, you think?
I'm just saying we have a chance to do it better this time around. The irony of that, it was 1919, I believe. Yeah, that the courthouse burned out. So, I think this time we have a chance to avoid the mistakes. The 20th century, a lot of wealth went out of West Virginia. We didn't keep that much for us. The 21st century, I think if we change the rules, we can do a lot better. That's the main reason we're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does this change like what we get on severance on any of those things now?
No, because as I was trying to allude to, what it would do is it would basically hold what you're getting now. So like, for example, I mentioned currently the state is allocating about $65 million. gas service tax collections. What it do, that'd be the base. It's everything above whatever that baseline is, so it wouldn't touch what you're currently getting. Obviously, you're gonna get more because more gas service tax collections are coming. You're gonna be able to split up 75% of the additional revenues. You're actually gonna get more. But what it's saying of the additional money that you're not seeing, I mean, you're not spending it because you're not seeing it. And it's just saying, let's hide it, in accounts, and let's make sure that the, legislature doesn't read it. And that's the other point. A lot of commissioners and a lot of economic development officials, they've expressed concern, and rightfully so. I mean, West Virginia's history of creating funds for good purposes have often backfired because the legislature, for whatever reason, has decided to raid it and use those monies for a number of things. So our goal here is to create a fund that's inviolate, that would be permanent, that would be sustainable for future generations. Our goal would to be make it so restrictive that it would be nearly impossible for the legislature to raid it. Because we think that this is our ability to give back wealth to future generations, that they're, our kids and our grandkids. We think this is our legacy to our future. That's why they call it the Future Fund.
Well, I think we